I'm no good at taking good advice, and I'm self-careless, so don't tell me twice that lately I've been so stuck in my head that I forget just about everything my therapist said. Maybe I'm self-helpless, maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe I'm self-helpless. Maybe we are all self-helpless.
Hey everyone, welcome to Self-Helpless. I'm Delaney Fisher, and today I'm chatting with Erika Martin, who is part of our series called Subscriber Stories, where listeners are writing in and then sharing their stories with all of us on the podcast. If you'd like to apply to be on the podcast for part of this series, we are reopening submissions in May of 2025. Stay tuned, I'll keep you posted. So today, Erika is sharing about her dad's diagnosis with Lewy body dementia, how it's impacting her and her family, the logistics around his care, the resources that have been incredibly helpful, including how to find the right support group for you, and how important it was for Erika to find people her own age experiencing this. She also shares about her own grieving process, what's helping her cope, and she also offers up a lot of detail around the years and moments leading up to her dad's diagnosis, different signs and things like that, which I know is going to help a lot of people tuning in become informed about this for the sake of their own loved ones and themselves. I also didn't find out until we started recording this episode together, but the day we recorded was actually Erika's dad's birthday. How wild is that? So, happy belated birthday to Erika's dad and sending love to their whole family. Here's my conversation with Erika. Erika, thank you so much for being here today and being willing to share about what's been going on with you and your family. Really appreciate it. And I know a lot of people are going to be helped by this episode.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to talk about this and hopefully help one less person feel alone in this because it can be a very isolating experience to go through.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So, if you don't mind, maybe starting off with what is Lewy body dementia and how it's
Mhm.
impacting your life and your family at the moment?
Yes, so my dad was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia about 2 years ago. And today's actually his 63rd birthday. So, happy birthday, Dad.
Oh, happy birthday! What's your dad's name?
Bruno.
Oh, happy birthday, Bruno.
Yes. So, on the day we're recording, it is my dad's 63rd birthday. So, it
Wow.
is one of those things where we did not think for his 63rd birthday we would be dealing with dementia or that we would be getting a diagnosis when he was in his early 60s. So, probably thinking back on it now, 6 to 7 years ago, we started seeing some changes in him, some like memory issues, some things where it's like he wasn't behaving like he normally would, getting more agitated easily, and it just kind of kept growing from there. And what really spurred my parents going to the doctor was a couple things. I used to live about 5 minutes away from my parents, so for a lot of like holiday gatherings, they would come and pick me up, and my husband would usually be working that day, so he would like meet us at the house. And my dad came to got me at this point. I've been living in this apartment for several years. My sister and her husband had actually lived in that complex as well. So he came to get me, and we got to a stop sign, and he just looked confused. Like he did not
Wow.
know which way to go. And so, very calmly, I had to be like, "Oh, hey, Dad, we take a left here to get back to your house." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I just got confused for a second. I came in the other way to the apartment complex, and there were 2 ways to come in, but, like, it was right by a grocery store that my parents frequented all the time, so that was something that was very jarring to be like, "Okay, something isn't right."
Mm.
Um, so I talked to my mom about it, and, it's very hard to want to believe that something is wrong, and I understand that a lot more now than just kind of being like, "Oh, it's a one-time thing, like, we're getting older." But things along those
Right.
lines kept happening, and there was one morning, my dad woke up in their home and he thought that they were in a hotel for several hours and did not believe
Wow.
that they were actually in their house. And once my sister and I found out about that, we spoke to my mom. We're like, it's time. We need to get dad to a doctor. So
Mm.
after he went to his primary, they did some initial screenings. He went to a neurologist and they put him through the whole testing of MRIs and imaging and everything else. It was discovered that he had a stroke that went undetected about 6 to 7 years ago.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah. And because of that stroke, he now has blind spots on the right side of each of his eyes. So that explains some of the things where he was having issues like finding the fork next to his plate or his water glass, like small things like that that just seemed a little off. And then we got the diagnosis that he did have Lewy body dementia, which is different than other types of dementia or Alzheimer's. And again, I'm not a medical professional. This is just what I know.
Of course, yes.
But usual signs of Lewy body dementia is hallucinations, mood changes or swings that are pretty rapid, and then trouble with moving. So those are the big three that we've seen the most in my dad. So he does have visual hallucinations from time to time. He definitely has like those rapid mood swings where all of a sudden he's, fine talking about something and then it switches on a dime. And then the longer this has gone on, so even in the 2 years since we've gotten the diagnosis, like, him moving around has gone just more and more challenging.
Wow, I am not a medical professional either, obviously. I don't think I realized that a stroke could be undetected where there's no obvious signs of that happening. And do you know if somehow that was caught at that point, would that have changed any of this or this outcome? Anything like
Yeah.
that you've learned?
So not necessarily that we know of. The doctors think it probably, like, was a minor stroke that happened in his sleep, which is why it went undetected.
Wow.
My dad has high blood pressure, so, like, some of the things we thought was just being caused because of that, but when he went on his blood pressure medication, things calmed down for a while, and then things, like, started happening again. So the stroke, they think, like I said, spurred the dementia,
Mm.
but there's no really conclusiveness of, like, if we had caught the stroke, would it have stopped it, or would it just inevitably happen at some point?
Right. So, as a family, you were witnessing something very obvious changing, but for your dad, was he aware of anything changing with him? Anything that you can speak to about your dad's experience?
Yeah, so now he definitely, like, knows he has it and talks about it, and everything. Obviously, he's not happy with the diagnosis. No one in the family is. It's not something that's easy to go through. I think a
Right.
lot of the struggle of, like, getting him to the doctor is I love my dad. He is a very stubborn person, so it's, like, not wanting to admit that something is wrong, even though when it is, like, there were small things that were happening where my dad worked for the majority of his life and was in leadership positions, and he was calling me, asking me, like, "How do I change this document to PDF?" And, like, not in the
Mhm.
boomer sense of, like, "I don't know how to do this," but, like,
Right,
something
right.
that he used to know how to do, like, "How do I add an attachment to an email?" Things that I'm like, "You've been doing this for years. How come
Yeah.
you all of a sudden don't know how to do it?" And even when I would like write down instructions for him to help him through it, not knowing he had a stroke and had blind spots, he like was having issues reading the notes. And he was had to put things like very largely. So I think there was a bit of denial there for him just because, no one wants to admit when something is wrong with them, but it's also, I'm sure,
Mm.
very scary going through this. And it's a slow process too with dementia. It can be of just like, oh, it's a small thing here or there. It's not all of a sudden one day someone with it wakes up and can't remember anything.
Right. The beginning of this, it might be easy to write something off as that was a one-off incident or we're
Mm,
getting older and all of that. And maybe it
yes.
even becomes a little bit more normalized to where it can be hard to draw the line in the sand of, okay, it's time. But obviously you had a moment like that with your dad. So when he first got the diagnosis, how did you and your dad and the rest of your family initially respond to this? What was those first few moments, hours, days like for everybody?
For me personally, it was heartbreaking, but also it was, in a way, good to know we knew what it was at this point. Because for me, it had been several years of being like, something's not right, and we don't know what it is. And
Mhm.
being able to put a name to it was really helpful for me, I know. I think it was a bit of the same for my sister, because we were both at that point where we're like, something needs to happen, something needs to change. And then my dad was very upset about it, understandably, because this is not how anyone plans their life to go, especially in their early 60s when it is still considered like early onset dementia. Most people get diagnosed with dementia like in their late 70s, early 80s,
Mhm.
versus being in their early 60s. So he got diagnosed about 20 years before the average person.
Wow.
So it just put a whole change to his entire life, an entire change to my mom's life. So I do think there was a bit of denial on both of their ends for not wanting it to be the truth, but it was. And I think for me, it was really about, okay, at least we know what it is. How can we make a plan forward? I'm very much a type A planner.
Mm.
So for me, it's like, how do we do this? Is there anything that can be done to help him with his symptoms and what is going on?
Right. Do you feel like you just kind of kicked into survival mode in the beginning and it was really about the logistics more so than processing the emotions? What was that like for you as somebody who is type A?
Think it was a little bit of both.
Yeah.
So obviously it was very upsetting to hear this and know that, my dad does have a terminal illness and we know that his days are numbered. On average, people from their diagnosis with Lewy body have 5 to 8 years. Some people have lived 20 years with it. So you just really don't know. It could be longer, it could be shorter. A lot of it depends, on how quickly it progresses and probably any other underlying health conditions that someone may have. So that was part of it of just not knowing how long I had left with my dad is really hard. So that part was very emotional and realizing like we do know our days are numbered. And then the other part of me is, okay, what do we need to do to make sure things are in order? So not only my dad is taken care of, but now my mom is taken care of when inevitably he does pass or he does have to go someplace to get additional care that none of us can provide anymore.
Mhm. I have so many questions about the logistics of how your family started to plan, but another question for you before we get into that, is that helpful or is that really hard to know that that timeline is such a big gap? I mean, between 5 to 20 years is such a massive difference. Do you feel like either yourself or anybody else in your family has put a lot of pressure to ensure that your dad can live the longest as possible? Is it hard to be present? Is it easy to be present? What has that experience been like for you?
It's hard. It's really hard. Like when I see my dad, dementia is one of those diseases. It's very slow and it progresses at different rates for everyone and even at different speeds for people throughout the time that they have it. So there are times where it's like I might go a couple weeks between seeing my dad and I don't really see a lot of change. And then other times I see a big amount of change. So that's a really hard part of knowing that the dad that I grew up with and who has been with me most of my life, he's not there in the same sense anymore. Like he's going to constantly change and his memory is just going to continue to change and evolve and his moods can change and evolve. So that's been a really hard part for me is we have to keep things like light and fluffy when I'm talking to my dad because he's in a phase right now, which is common to have like depression and apathy with this, where he focuses on the negative a lot.
Mm,
So it's like and then he'll get stuck in it. So when I go over and I see him, it's like, "Oh, let's talk about something happy. Like, how are the cats doing? Like,
right.
let's talk about this movie or let's talk about like this happy thing that's happening." Because when he gets stuck on those subjects, it kind of just brings everything down because it's like he gets stuck in a spiral he can't get out of
Mhm.
being so stuck in it. So it gets challenging to be there and to be present at times because I want to see my dad as much as possible and be with him because he is going to constantly change throughout this entire process. But I also have to take care of myself and my own mental health and everything else going on. And anyone who has a parent or friend or family member who has dementia will tell you it is really hard to see someone you love just slowly slip away from you.
Right. And I would imagine, I mean, it makes sense that when you see him, you're wanting to or needing to keep things light and fluffy, talk about the cats or the TV or something. But I'd imagine that sometimes that's a really big contrast of what you're feeling inside or what you might feel like you need to talk about or let out, but you have to prioritize, or you're in this position, you're prioritizing what your dad needs. So how are you taking care of your own, emotional health and mental health right now? What are those outlets that you have?
Yes. So I go to personal therapy. That's been a huge
Right.
thing.
Yes.
Yes. And it just so happens I switched therapists recently, and my current therapist has a parent who also has Alzheimer's. So
Oh.
it's been great to have a therapist who understands exactly what it's like to see your parent go through this and how challenging that it can be. Um, so that's been really helpful, just having that outlet to be able to say exactly how I'm feeling and not feel like you have to sugarcoat it for anyone in your family, because the space is just for you to like deal with your feelings and talk about how upsetting it is and how challenging it is to go through all this and all the changes that happen with it. So, personal therapy has been a huge part of me being able to take care of my mental health and all of this.
Oh, I would imagine having a therapist who gets it, not just theoretically, but experientially, is kind of a must in this situation. It would be hard if the person on the other end didn't really understand what you were going through. You had to like explain it on top of actually going through it. So that's amazing that you found somebody who has that shared experience with you. As far as the beginning phase of starting to make preparations for your dad's care, your family's care, what kind of logistics did you all have to get in place that maybe you didn't realize that you would have to, or maybe that could help somebody prepare a little bit for this if they find themselves in a similar situation right now?
Yeah, so full transparency, we're still going through it, and I think
Yeah.
it's gonna be a constant thing of trying to evolve and figure out the best solutions. So I would highly recommend to anyone going through this to contact the Alzheimer's Association. They have local chapters throughout the entire US. They also have a 24/7 helpline, and it is a great resource for any person or any family going through this. It's completely free to talk to anyone there, and they have all these different resources for you in the area. They have support groups. They recently connected us with an elder law attorney, so we can start figuring out like the finances and everything about how do we make sure we have what we need to take care of dad, but also so mom can have a future after dad is no longer with us and no longer needs the care as well, because it's a whole separate type of financial planning and like law structure that you have to go through that I am not an expert on at all, but thankfully there are people out there that can help walk you through that portion of it. Because there's all sorts of different types of laws with Medicaid and disability, and how does all of this work? And now that my dad's on disability, he qualifies for certain things, but sometimes there's a waiting period. But if you qualify, for example, dementia is one of the things that qualifies you to get on Medicaid faster through
Mm.
disability, where a lot of times there's a 2-year waiting period to get on it. So all these things that I had no idea how any of it worked, and now we're just kind of
Yeah.
slowly working our way through it. So I would definitely say reach out to the Alzheimer's Association. They're a great resource. And the sooner you start working through it, the better. It's really hard to go in there and talk about how your parent is, slowly fading away in front of you, but you have to do these things to not only protect them, but protect if you have any other parents who are taking care of them or siblings who are in the picture as well.
It's just gotta be so challenging that, you get this news and then there's a never-ending to-do list now of things that you have to be tackling while you're also,
Mhm.
grieving and coping. How is your mom doing with this? I mean, I obviously know you'd kind of be speaking on her behalf, but anything that you think she would be comfortable with you sharing, this idea of what maybe retirement would look like with your spouse and how it just changes on a dime.
Yeah, it's been really hard for her, and it's taking her a bit of time, but I think she is finally to that point where she's ready to accept help and support. So she started going to a support group recently, which I think is going to be really beneficial for her. And we're, like I said, in that planning phase and starting to talk to like different types of professionals of how we can do this. But it's a lot on her with a daily basis. She is still working a bit and then having to come and take care of my dad And we know that my dad can't be alone during the day much longer, especially for longer periods of time. It's going to get to that point where he needs more constant supervision. So that's part of what we're trying to plan for at this moment. And one of the things that was the most eye opening, I believe, for myself and my sister was back in May, my mom went on a girls' weekend with her cousins and her sisters, which was much needed, just some time away, a couple nights away, just so she can relax and, not have to worry about my dad.
Yeah.
So my sister and I were taking care of my dad during that time, and it was very eye-opening to where he was at that point because I hadn't spent, over a few hours with him at a point anymore. And it's him waking up in the middle of the night and not knowing where the bathroom is and having to show it to him. It's making sure, he has his meals and everything is prepared for that. It's going out into public and having to not care that people see him or might see him in a different light, and I don't even know if they do or not, but, like, I can tell he walks and moves a little bit different than the average person now, so it's, like, kind of a little bit that self-consciousness of it, and to be completely honest, like, I had to go into a public restroom with my dad when we were taking care of him, and that
Mm,
was something I just kinda had to be like, "Can't care what anyone thinks, like, this is for the safety of my dad and
right.
where he is at the point in this disease that I need to make sure he's okay, that he doesn't fall in there or use the wrong thing or anything along those lines." So, having to just kinda put on your blinders and be like, "Nope, this is what needs to happen for him to keep him safe and take care of him," versus thinking about all those outside eyes on you or, ordering meals for him at a restaurant because he can't really read the menu due to the blind spots on his eyes. So he has trouble reading now. So ordering for him. And my dad was always like such a jokester growing up. And it's like his timing of things doesn't really work as well anymore because of it. So you kind of
Mm,
have to just like shrug those off when he's like trying to make a joke to the server or like the person at checkout. And
right.
it's just like, it's okay, dad. Like, let's just keep going.
Wow. Um, how how has this impacted any prior plans that maybe everybody had individually or as a family? You hear about people taking breaks from work or moving home or like did anything like that logistically happen for you guys or in process of that?
Fortunately, not at this point, but we are
Mm,
trying to figure out, like I said, in-home care for my dad. So that's
right.
the reason why we're really going to the lawyer, making sure he's on the correct disability and Medicaid and everything on those lines, because it will help cover some of those costs. So my mom doesn't have to incur it.
Mm,
So at this point, no one has had to change. But I think on the flip side, for me and my husband, it's made us realize that the future isn't guaranteed.
right.
Retirement isn't guaranteed. So we want to try and make sure that we're living life to the fullest as much as we can with our crazy schedules. And I kind of battle with feeling a little bit guilty about that, but also realizing that you never know what's going to happen in 30 years. My life could be completely different than I expect it to be. And I might not be retiring. I could, have a terminal illness, or maybe my husband does, or another family member does. And that just changes everything.
Mhm. Absolutely. Do you know if this dementia is this genetic? Is this something that you and your siblings now have to think about for yourselves?
So Lewy body dementia is not genetic that they have
Okay.
found so far.
Okay.
Um, and I'm not sure if any other types are. It's definitely a concern with it being in my family now that even though it's not genetic, it's just something that I'm constantly thinking about too of if
Right.
this were to happen to me, like how would this affect my husband, my family, my friends, my support network, and kind of just being like, how would I prepare for this? Now
Right.
seeing firsthand like how it goes without expecting it to happen at all.
So, you just mentioned that obviously this has impacted the plans that maybe you're making with your husband or you're trying to live life to the fullest. Can you speak more about how this experience has impacted your approach to life, your perspective on life? What kind of things are you putting in place now that maybe weren't there before?
Mhm. So one of the things I've always like to do and want to do more of is travel. So that's one of the things we're definitely like making a priority is to
Mm.
maybe it's not always every single year, but taking a big trip every couple years just so we can go and do these things and see the things we want to see and not wait for retirement for it because we know that's not guaranteed.
Right.
Um,
What kind of trips and stuff are you planning? Where do you
yes,
wanna visit? Where do you wanna go?
I want to go everywhere, but our next trip our next trip is we're going to Alaska next May
Oh,
for about
nice.
11 days.
Very cool. Oh, that's awesome. That's gonna be
Yes.
beautiful.
So we're very excited for that.
Yeah. Is there anything else that some people describe that maybe their capacity for maybe certain trivial things that used to bother them in the past is just they don't have the capacity for that anymore? Like anything else that you've noticed changes within yourself since this is going on?
Yeah, I'd say one of the biggest things is I definitely take to heart that you don't know what's going on in someone else's life when you meet them.
Yeah.
Um, this is one of those things where, I mean, now I'm speaking about it on a podcast, so more people are going to know about this, but at this point, I really haven't told anyone at work about it. Like my close friends and family know, but for me, it's like I don't want anyone to view me differently or like think of me differently. Just knowing that I have this going on in my life. It's like I'm living my life to the best of my ability. And yes, I do have a parent who is terminally ill, but that doesn't change like who I am as a person. It
Right.
does change my priorities though, and how
Mhm.
I approach things. Like if someone's having a bad day, I try not to let it bother me because I know I've definitely been that person at times, or there have been times when it's just hit me all at once and I'm on the bathroom crying like during the middle of the day before I have to hop on a meeting. Like
Yeah.
you just have those moments. So I try and be more empathetic, not only like with myself, but with other people because you just don't know what's going on in their personal lives. And seeing how this is happening is just, I know I don't want to wait around for things to happen. You know, I want to go out and live life and experience the things I want to experience and travel and those small things as much as I try not to let them bother me, they still will, but knowing that you never know what tomorrow is going to bring, unfortunately, and that it could change your life completely. So I doing my best to be appreciative of everything that I have right now.
Oh my gosh, these are just all lessons that we all need to implement this into our life, you know? Have you noticed any changes in your loved ones with their shifts in priorities? You mentioned like making sure travel is now in the calendar instead of just talking about it for yourself. Anything else that you've noticed other people are doing?
I'd say one of the things my sister and I are trying to be a lot better about prioritizing is making sure we get the family together. And while we're not perfect about it, she has 3 kids, so she's always running in like 12 different directions at once.
Yeah.
It's like, how can we make sure we all come together for dad's birthday and mom's birthday and make sure, we do things for the holidays and how can we take it off of our parents' plate? So, like,
Right.
instead of our parents hosting like Christmas or Thanksgivings, like, how can we do that and help out in those areas to take that burden off of them so they don't have to worry about having people over or cleaning or cooking for everyone and we can do that for them as well and try and get the family together too.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm very fortunate that my mom is the main caregiver for my dad. So I was trying to like find ways to care for her and also like be there for him and emotionally and it's a weird role reversal almost of like I feel like I'm being a parent to my parent now,
Right.
which again I wasn't expecting to be doing in my early 30s. That's something you see like your parents doing for your grandparents. Not
Yeah.
you see a lot of people around your own age doing it. So I think that's been the biggest change is having to help my mom through this process and like guide her through it to the best of my ability because again I'm not an expert on it and everything that needs to be done but how can we work through this together and getting my sister involved into it as well to make sure we're all on the same page. We're all trying to get the same things done. So my dad is cared for to the best of all of our abilities, but also our mom is cared for and she, doesn't get too burned out from caring for him.
Right. With this going on, maybe I don't know how it's impacting your work or anything else. Do you find that you need more breaks or more rest or anything like that?
Yes, well, part of being a type A person is I feel like even with work, I'm making sure everything gets done appropriately. Everything's done, of course, on time. But I find that
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I just need to like shut down
Yeah.
completely and just like have a moment for myself. And I've always been a very big proponent of work-life balance. So I'm like, I've worked my 8 hours. That thing that's on my to-do list, that can be moved to tomorrow. It's okay. Like I don't have to
Mhm.
work overtime and get it done now, and just trying to find ways to relax and let go because I do feel like I just constantly have an underlying like worry and emotional weight on me,
Right.
knowing that there's going to be a day, probably in the not so far future, where my dad might not remember me or my mom or my sister, and that's going to be incredibly heartbreaking. So,
Mhm.
just like knowing what the future could potentially look like and not knowing when that's going to happen is definitely the hardest part, and that's exhausting to carry around with you constantly.
You mentioned that you don't want people to treat you differently when they find this out about you. Can you talk a little bit more
Mhm.
about that? Like, how can people around you best support you and your family when they do find out this is what you're going through?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know how to react, and I completely understand them not knowing how to react because
Mm.
unless I was going through this and I had a really close friend tell me that they have a parent with a terminal illness, I wouldn't know how to react either.
Right.
So I think sometimes some people may think if they ask me about it, I'm just gonna go into like a 20-hour conversation about like what's going on. It'll be like a sob story and just nonstop me talking about it. But that isn't what it is. For me, it's if someone asks me how my dad is doing, it's creating space for me to talk about it if I want to at that time
Mhm.
versus feeling the need to talk about it. So it's really having a support system that can understand like creating space is the best thing. And if I need it at that moment, I know I can take it. But if I don't, I'll probably just be like, no, he isn't doing well. It's really hard. And then I'll probably change the subject rather quickly to be like, how have you been? What's going on in your life if I'm not in the space to talk about it at that moment? So I
Right.
think just asking goes so far, and it
Right.
makes me feel seen and that you know that I'm doing my best to deal with it and having a hard time as well.
That's a nice tip that people can bring from this is, asking the question and letting the other person either elaborate or not, and then go from there, right? Is there anything else that's made you feel supported by the friends that know about this that might give people some insight in what they could do for their own friends that are going through
Mm.
something similar?
Yeah, I would say again, the big thing is just asking like how you're doing and be willing to sit there and be open and honest. For me, I've been able to really tell when someone asks me like how my dad is, what their intention is. Like, is their intention really to sit there and have that space created for me to talk about it? Or are they
Mm.
just asking it because they feel like they need to? So I think
Mm.
being very genuine in it is fine. Like, I would rather you not ask me how my dad is doing if you, even yourself, don't have the space to talk about it or hear me talk about it. And that's okay. Like, we all have
Right.
those days. Like, we've all had friends in tough situations. And sometimes you emotionally just don't have the capacity to hear about it on that day for yourself either. And that's okay. We've all been there. We all have things going on in our lives. So I think just being genuine with your intentions is really helpful, and your friends can see it when you're not genuine about it, or just in general if someone asks me like I know if they genuinely want to hear or not.
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Um,
Mhm.
has this changed anything for you about past experiences or memories with your dad? Do you feel differently about those things now?
It's really hard to see your parent not be who they were and like your happy memories of them. For me, my dad was always that guy with a big belly laugh who would like turn bright red when he thought something was really funny and start shaking. And it would just make everyone else in the room laugh as well. And he just became known for this so much that he once got a Tickle Me Elmo as a gift.
Cute.
Um, yeah, just because the person was like, "You this is exactly what you remind me of when you start laughing so hard," and I haven't seen that type of joy and, like, humor from my dad, like, since this happened, and
Mm.
even a few years before that, like, he hasn't had that big belly laugh, that sense of humor, and that's one of the really hard things for me is not knowing if that is going to come back at some point during all of this. It
Mm,
seems like at this point, he's just very stuck in like apathy and kind of feeling down, which is a very understandable, but it's hard because I remember the guy who used to at family dinners when they were taking forever would take a napkin ring and put them in his eye just to like make me laugh and like growl like a pirate when I was like 6 years old. Like
mm,
those are the things I remember fondly, and it's not there anymore.
right.
And I really miss that sense of humor he had and just like his joy for life that he had when I was younger.
Do you have any like rituals for yourself before you see him or talk to him and after you see him or talk to him, if it was especially, a tough visit or something? Anything that you do around that?
It depends. I mean, because emotionally, I'm always in like a different place when I see him. So I
Yeah.
try and just go into it very even keeled because I'm never sure like what the situation is going to be.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes, it's perfectly fine. He seems to be in a pretty good mood, and then other times you can tell he's agitated. So I'd say those harder times, I'm not always the best about it, I will admit that, but sometimes journaling afterwards can help to kind of talk through like how that felt. Um, my husband has been a great sounding board of me just like talking to him about it and the experiences, especially if he wasn't there with me or even if he was, because the way I'm experiencing this situation is different than the way he is.
Right.
So being able to talk through it afterwards or journal through it, or sometimes I just need to not talk about it
Yeah.
too. There are times where it's like, I just can't right now. I need to just like listen to my music, watch a show, like even scroll on Instagram, which I know isn't always great, but just do something to take me out of this deep place that I am in right now, like feeling so much seeing him.
I can imagine how important those escapes are. We had a guest on a little while back who kind of put things into two categories when you're going
Mhm,
through a grieving process of kind of like the escapism and the
mhm,
joyful stuff, and then the things that you have to tend to really process what's
mhm,
going on, and how both of those categories are equally important. Have you
mhm.
stumbled across any like new favorite quotes or books or movies or like anything like that that you have found that has been helping you in some way?
So there is a quote that I've loved for a long time. It was actually on the Yoga with Adriene channel on YouTube. I love
Oh,
to do her yoga
yes. I
practices.
like yoga with
Um,
Adrian. Yes, love her.
yes. So one thing that she said in multiple of her videos is that the universe is for me and so is everything else.
Mm,
And for me, that's just a reminder that even though it's a tough time right now, like this is just the way my path is at the moment and it will get better. It might not feel like it's always getting better, it might not feel the same, my life might not look the same, but everything is working to help you get through this.
that is such a good one. Is there anything that you wish that you could have told yourself at the beginning of this process?
Yes, I would say don't be afraid to ask for help and reach out for resources. I have found a support group that is fantastic. The first time that I went to a support group, it was for people whose parents have dementia or Alzheimer's, and not knowing what I was walking into. Most people in there were my parents' age. Again, it was a
Mhm.
virtual, so virtually walking into it. And that was really challenging for me because they're talking about their parents who are in their 70s, their 80s, and I actually left that support group feeling more upset and angry and jealous that these people are having so much more time with their parents when they were healthy than I will ever get.
Oh,
And that they're not having to deal with these issues in their 30s. They're dealing with them in their 50s or 60s or 70s. And I just remember leaving thinking, like, I shouldn't have to be going through this right now. Like, I don't
right.
fit in here. So I went to that support group twice, and while they were a fantastic group of people, like I just knew it wasn't for me, and I needed to find a support group that I could relate to more. And now I'm in one for people who have parents that have dementia or Alzheimer's, but you have to be under the age of 40 to be in it.
Mm.
which has
Yes.
made a world of difference because now I'm talking to people who are more around my age and talking about how are we balancing work and having a parent with a terminal illness? How are we balancing our personal relationships and our romantic relationships and the day-to-day life of what would be happening for someone in their mid to late 20s or 30s or in that range of age versus, oh, my kids are out of the house. Everyone's graduated. Like I'm caring for my parent and my parent already like has grandchildren and everything. And I'm over here thinking like my dad probably won't see even his oldest grandchild graduate from high school. So
Mhm.
finding a support group with people around my age has been extremely beneficial and helpful to know that I'm not alone in this and other people are also experiencing the same issues that I am.
Oh, absolutely. I know my former co-host talked about a similar experience of when her mom got diagnosed with dementia. She's also in her 30s, and the support
Mhm.
groups that were out there with people much older and having a hard time resonating, or like you said, kind of feeling even more upset. I'm so glad that you found a group that you feel really resonates with you. And I don't know if she realized that those age specific groups were out there.
Mhm.
So I might have to relay that those exist. Are you able to share? I mean, especially obviously if it's an anonymous group, of course you can't share, but could you point people in the direction of maybe how they could stumble upon the right age group, support group for
Yes.
themselves? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so I also found that through the Alzheimer's Association.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
what they ended up having to do is, the chapter that I was talking to didn't have an age specific one, but they were able to connect me with another chapter throughout the US that had an age specific support group that I could be a part of.
Ah, beautiful. Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
That's amazing that that exists for people. Um,
Yes.
is there anything that you do for yourself, or has helped you in the especially really hard or darker moments?
Yeah, sometimes I fight it really hard not to go to that spot, and it just makes it worse because I'm
Mhm.
fighting it on top of trying to balance everything else in my life. So sometimes I have found that I do just need to break down and cry or be sad or just sit in my feelings about it because that is what my body is telling me that I need to do at this moment.
Right.
And it's hard to do. Like I mentioned before, I have sat on my bathroom floor just sobbing in the middle of the day before because it just hits me all at once. I've done that in my kitchen. Like I've probably done that in every single room of my house at this point. And sometimes you just have to let it out because it's really hard to carry all of these emotions in you at all times while you're also trying to live your life and feel like you're living a quote unquote like normal life for someone your age. So
Mhm.
letting it out sometimes is really what you need to do, and then I've found that once I do that, I can usually pick myself up and find something positive or find something else to do that will help me in that moment, whether that be working out or talking to a friend or just doing something that I find to be fun, playing my music really loudly and dancing around the kitchen, just something to, like, pick me up afterwards after, I feel all the feels.
Mhm. When you do visit your dad, is there anything that you have found that like a shared experience that he's responding to really well?
Say, yeah, I mean, it's still really hard because I never know what he's going to be like when I see him. It just kind of depends on his mood and how he's feeling that day. One of the things we can always bond about is my parents have two cats. I have two cats. We can always talk about the cats. We've
Right.
always been a big animal family. So, like, talking about that is always like really helpful and keeps things light. Sometimes it is hard to talk about like the happy times in childhood because he doesn't always remember.
Mm.
Um, I recently went out to LA for work, and my dad's sister used to live in LA, so it was like we used to go there when I was a kid, and he was I was telling him about the trip, and he was asking me like, "Oh, have you been to LA before?" And,
Mhm.
like, those small comments sometimes hurt more than anything because he's so innocent in it, and he doesn't remember that, like, we've went there together several times in my childhood. So sometimes it's really hard to talk about like things that made you happy in the past because he might be having a day where he doesn't remember it. And
Right.
it's not his fault, but it's really hurtful when those things happen because it's just heartbreaking to know that piece by piece he's slowly slipping away. So the biggest thing I have found is just trying to keep it light and fluffy. And one of his favorite things is ice cream, especially soft ice cream. So when my sister and I were taking care of him back in May, like, we're out to get ice cream both days. I'm like, okay, that's what we're doing. And he was just like super happy, just sitting there eating his soft ice cream and, just having a good time.
Yeah.
I think for him, it's just been very lonely as well. So having people around him tends to help make him happier and feel seen and just know that he isn't alone as well.
Yeah. Well, Erica, thank you so much for opening up about all of this today. Really, really appreciate it. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think is especially important for people to know, or anything that you would like to tell somebody if they're really resonating with what you're going through? Anything that you might want to share with them as well?
Yeah, I would say just reach out and ask for help. It's hard and it's scary, but once you do it once, it gets easier to keep asking for help over and over again, and that doesn't change who you are as a person or change anything about you, but we all need help at times. Again, I will plug the Alzheimer's Association, like, they are fantastic. They're a great place for resources, but even just stopping a close loved one who maybe isn't as connected to the situation and letting them know that you need to talk about it or have to share how you're feeling in that moment can be very beneficial to talk to someone you trust about it, whether that is a family member or a friend or a support group or a personal therapist. Just having someone that you can talk about it with when you're having those moments is extremely beneficial.
If somebody wants to reach out to you and thank you for sharing your story today or connect with you along those lines, do you have anywhere that you could direct people?
Yeah, they can email
Awesome.
me. So my email is Erica, it's Erika dot Martin dot 1007 at gmail.com. So it's Erica dot Martin dot 1007 at gmail.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's very generous of you. Well,
Mhm.
thank you again for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everyone, feel free to share this episode with a friend who needs to hear it. Be sure to check out the awesome resources Erica mentioned, and you can also email her to thank her for today's episode at erica.martin.1007 at gmail.com. That's ERIKA.MARTIN.1007 at gmail.com. Talk to you all soon. Thank you for
Maybe
tuning into
I'm
Self-Helpless. You can find our brand new
self-helpless.
merch, Patreon community, and other fun goodies at
Maybe I'm
selfhelplesspodcast.com. We'd be thrilled if you left an
self-helpless.
Apple Podcast review, shared this episode
Maybe
with a friend, or
I'm
post about it on Instagram and tag us at Self-Helpless
self-helpless.
Podcast so we could repost you
Maybe
and say
we
hi. As an
are
independently produced show, we sincerely appreciate your
self-helpless.
support. Thanks, everybody.